I Hate English by Levine. I hate English, Maymay said in her head in Chinese. Maymay was smart in her school, in Hong Kong, in Chinese. But her family moved to New York. She didn't know why. She didn't want to move. And she said all that in Chinese. In Chinatown in New York was okay. People looked like people she knew. People talked like people she knew. In Chinese. In New York, in school, everything happened in English. Such a lonely language. Each letter stands alone and makes its own sound. Not like Chinese. Sometimes English letters fight each other. We will go on a class trip, the teacher said in English. Trip, thought Maymay. The letters T and R bang against each other and each keeps its own sound. Not like Chinese. Maymay loved Chinese, especially writing. Fast strokes, short strokes, long strokes. The brush, the pen, the pencil, all seemed to fly in her hand, but that was Chinese. Maymay wouldn't speak in school. Most of the time she understood what her teacher said, but everything was in English, and Maymay wouldn't speak English. One day her cousin Bing took her to Chinatown Learning Center. Students brought their homework for help, but not Maymay. She wouldn't work in English. Tutors helped the older ones with their English. Maymay helped the little ones with arithmetic. She was good at arithmetic. Numbers weren't English or Chinese. They were just numbers. Maymay loved the center. She talked and listened and explained and argued. She did everything in Chinese. She helped the director set up the tables. She played ping pong and checkers. She sang songs. She wrote letters to friends in Hong Kong, all in Chinese. Dear Yifeng, she wrote in Chinese, how would you like me to visit you? She laughed as she finished the letter, then she had to write the address in English. Silly post office in New York, she thought. Why can't they read Chinese? Maymay had a dream. She thought about it at least once a day, sometimes twice or 3 times. She told Bing about it in Chinese. All the gang, Bing and Mona and Shek and Leo and Anne, would go on a plane to Hong Kong. On the plane, everyone would speak Chinese. Instead, they went to Jones Beach with the director. Maymay and her friends rode on 3 trains and 1 bus. They brought lunch, bathing suits, towels, and empty pails. The trip took 2 hours, and they talked and joked the whole way in Chinese. Leo and Bing buried themselves in the sand. Anna and Mona built a castle on top of them. Shek, said Maymay, let's dig for shellfish. And off they went with their pails. You can't eat those, said the lifeguard. Maymay smiled and kept digging. He probably doesn't know how to cook them, Shek said in Chinese. She was right. The director made a fire in the picnic area and cooked the shellfish. Nobody said a word. Everybody was busy, very busy, eating. At last, Maymay looked up and said, delicious, in Chinese. And then one day, a terrible thing happened. A teacher came to the learning center to help Maymay with English. Who was this person with short hair and blue eyes? And why was she smiling? Maymay was afraid. She wouldn't speak a word in English or Chinese. Hello, I'm Nancy, the person said. She pointed to an empty table. Let's sit down. Maymay understood the teacher's English. The teacher had a book and she read a story. Maymay forgot that she didn't want to listen. The story was interesting, even if it was in English. It was about a boy who lived in New York more than 100 years ago. His family wanted to move to California. Maymay knew about California. She smiled to herself as she thought about California in Chinese. The teacher read on. The family crossed the country in a covered wagon. Covered wagon, thought Maymay. She didn't know the words for covered wagon in Chinese. Maymay didn't want to hear any more. She didn't want English to have words she didn't know in Chinese. She felt sad, and a tear slid down her cheek. She didn't want the teacher to see, but the teacher did see and said, let's stop for today, in English. That night in bed, Maymay felt afraid again. She wasn't sure why. She felt she might lose something. She felt she had lost something. She felt she would lose something. Good night, her mother said in Chinese. Good night, answered Maymay without thinking, in English. and she fell into a deep sleep. She dreamt about Hong Kong. In the dream, she went to see Yi Fong. But Yi Fong said, "Who are you?" in English. "Who am I?" dreamt Mei Mei. "I don't even remember my name." She woke up shouting, "I am Mei Mei," in Chinese. The next day, Mei Mei was mad. She stared at the teacher. She glared at the teacher. And then she said, "I don't care," to the teacher, in English. "Very good," said Nancy. "I knew you could speak English." "But I don't think you really want to learn," Nancy continued. "And that's too bad." "Why is it too bad?" Mei Mei thought, in Chinese. The teacher seemed to read her mind, because in America, almost everything happens in English. "Don't you want to go to an American movie? Don't you want to ask for pizza? Don't you want to have an ice cream cone? Don't you want to read the signs at the zoo? Don't you want to talk with me?" "I want to talk with you," said Nancy, in English. Mei Mei turned away. She wanted to tell Nancy that she liked her, but all she could say was, "I'm sorry," in English. Nancy suddenly jumped up. "Get your coat," she said to Mei Mei. "We're going to take a walk." Mei Mei said goodbye to Shek in Chinese. On the street, a strange thing happened. Nancy didn't ask Mei Mei to talk. Nancy didn't care if Mei Mei talked. Nancy didn't want Mei Mei to talk. Nancy was talking, in English. She told Mei Mei about her third grade teacher. She told Mei Mei about her favorite book. She told Mei Mei that she loved tomatoes and potatoes. She told Mei Mei about Mr. Schwartz, her dog. She told Mei Mei everything, it seemed, in English. Mei Mei thought about her school. She thought about her favorite book. She thought about char siu bao, her favorite food. And she thought about Su Fa, her cat, in Chinese. But Nancy wouldn't stop talking. She went on and on and on. "Forever talking," yelled Mei Mei, in English. And Nancy didn't seem to hear. She kept on talking. She started reading the store signs. She read the names forwards and backwards. Sang Ping became Nip Nas. Mei Mei became I'm. And still Nancy talked, in English. "Stop!" cried Mei Mei. She couldn't stand it anymore. She felt invisible. "I want to talk," she shouted, in English. And before she could think about what she was doing, Mei Mei began. She talked about Children's Day in Hong Kong. You get lots of presents. She talked about the dragon dances on Chinese New Year. She talked about her street in Hong Kong and all her friends nearby. She talked for 22 minutes without stopping, in English. Nancy was laughing, and as Mei Mei talked, Nancy laughed more and more. Mei Mei started to smile. Then she laughed a little, and then she shook with laughter. They both laughed so hard, neither one could say a word, in English or Chinese. "Thank you," said Nancy, as she gave Mei Mei a hug. "For what?" asked Mei Mei, still laughing. "For giving me," said Nancy, "a present of English." "You're welcome," said Mei Mei. And to this day, Mei Mei talks in Chinese and English whenever she wants.